make it clear.
Order. I did not make the comments.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight are my ever-revolving panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Here's a former Green Party MP, well-known social justice activist and political commentator, Keith Locke. And here's the editor of independent news site, commentator and journalist, Selwyn Manning. Welcome to you both. Coming up on tonight's GCSB special, Issue 1, we now know that 88 New Zealanders were illegally spied on by the GCSB. Why did they try to cover this up? And does the PM appointing his childhood school chum as director start looking less and less savoury? Issue 2, why shouldn't the GCSB be able to spy on New Zealand citizens on behalf of the Secret Intelligence Service and the New Zealand Police? And Issue 3 tonight, who is going to be held accountable for this? Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with Issue 1. The Prime Minister has had to hurriedly release the Kitteridge report into the spying tactics of the GCSB after a copy was leaked to the media showing that instead of the one unique case of Kim.com, 88 other New Zealanders have been illegally spied upon by the GCSB at the behest of the Secret Intelligence Service and the New Zealand Police. Why did the GCSB director and childhood school friend of John Key, Ian Fletcher, wait 6 months after knowing the spying was suspect and sought a ministerial certificate to hide the GCSB's involvement? Selwyn, how convenient that John Key was in America watching his son play baseball so that his mate and Deputy Bill English could sign this ministerial certificate. Is this a cover-up or is this corruption?
Well, that is one aspect of this whole mystery. If you look at all of the information that we are now privy to that is out in the public arena, and that includes affidavits of all concerned, court transcripts, and the information that has subsequently come out via media and politicians probing this issue, and you place that information on a timeline, the reasonably minded New Zealander out there, if they were all presented with that information, I believe, would come to a view where there is a gross cover-up. What is most concerning, and it elevates this to extreme proportions, is that that involvement, on however we define it, involves the GCSB, the police, it involves the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, it involves the office of the Prime Minister itself. Now, all of that complicity is one of the hugest issues that New Zealand has faced. What I'm talking about here, in specific terms, is when Detective Inspector Grant Wormald in the High Court in New Zealand was asked, did any other agency other than the police take a role in providing or operating surveillance on Kim.com and his associates? He replied no. A week later, the GCSB goes to the Prime Minister's office. That would have been received by the DPMC, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and they request that a ministerial certificate be signed by the Prime Minister, albeit acting, to exclude and suppress any revelations that the GCSB was operating illegally in that operation. That, to me, is a cover-up.
Yep. Is it corrupt?
One would say, I think a reasonably minded person once again would look at that, and if there is an act of an illegal act that has taken place, and a person or an entity, organisation, department, whatever you want to call it, retrospectively tries to cover up their tracks, there is a motivational instinct there that is very difficult to pinpoint, but it smacks to me of corruption.
Keith, you were in Parliament when the GCSB bill was being debated. Tell us, once and for all, was this loophole to allow the SIS and the New Zealand Police to use the GCSB to spy on our own citizens ever discussed?
No, it wasn't, and I was part of all those debates from the first reading through to the third reading. I spoke a lot at the committee stages. On every occasion, Labor and National speakers said this agency is only targeted to what they called foreign intelligence, foreign persons, foreign organisations. New Zealanders have nothing to worry about. And then I debated the green criticisms of the GCSB in the subsequent 9 years I was in Parliament, year after year after year, and the reply I got, National, Labor, this is only foreign intelligence. Nobody ever tried to say that this act here, that when you read it through, the objectives, the functions, everything else, is all about, it must be only foreign intelligence. You can't intercept the communication of a New Zealand resident or citizen. It's black and white. This is a spin, and this is what worries me too, and it's my experience in Parliament that these various government lawyers, Crown Law and them, they see their role as to try and justify what the government has done, not come up with really independent advice. So they've picked a little few things about, or something about helping a public authority,
Right. Yes.
which, and they don't want it to go before a court. That's why they've backed off. Because if it went before the court, the judge would say, look, all this bill is about not spying on New Zealand citizens, only foreigners. Any little paragraph here has to be read in that context, helping a public authority, perhaps with foreign intelligence that the GCSB already possesses,
Right.
but not spying on behalf of the SIS. That's how any judge would interpret it. Absolutely.
Is this a gross overstepping of
Yeah,
the position
I
of the
think
GCSB?
any lawyer who has said that this somehow justifies the GCSB doing surveillance on behalf of the SIS with a warrant
Yep.
is a lawyer that's twisting their, that you have to question their ability as a lawyer or the integrity as a lawyer.
So let's be clear about this again. The loophole that the Prime Minister is suggesting legitimises this, that they've got a warrant from the SIS or the New Zealand Police. That was never the spirit or the intention of this bill.
No, and one of the things when a bill or a clause comes before a court, they do, if there's any doubt whatsoever, look back to what the intention of the legislation is by going to the first, second and third readings and what the government said and what the other MPs said. And if they did that, absolutely the government has been breaking the law.
Selwyn, how much more questionable now is Key's appointment of his mate to the position of the GCSB director in light of this?
You know, that's one of the areas that is so highly subjective, it's hard to actually hold on to. But all of the circumstances around this cause one to criticise and evaluate in the extreme on this. One of the hardest things from a media point of view, from a commentary or analysis point of view, is to try and figure the motivations behind an issue. And in many cases, due to our defamation laws in New Zealand, it's dangerous to try and fathom and state the motivation of another. How do you prove that? It's difficult. The facts of this matter is that this individual, Ian Fletcher, he may or may not be a very competent civil and public servant, but he has been placed into a situation, perhaps not of his own doing, perhaps he's been a part of it, that requires the public interest and the national interest to be observed. What Keith is talking about here, I think, is crucial to this whole thing. That at the moment, we saw in the House yesterday by the Deputy Prime Minister a move to try and actually justify the illegal carryings on by the GCSB and others in this whole affair. But what it comes down to in that act, when that act has been filed away, is the spirit of what you were questioning Keith about and what Keith was talking about. The intention of that act was to make sure that New Zealanders were not spied on. Now, for the Prime Minister to then say, oh, but there's this part down here and we're going to clarify that, is actually against the spirit of the act. It's not good enough for him to amend that particular act to sway it the other way. The spirit of the act and its intention by Parliament and those who were involved said that this is what it protected.
Keith, so who are these 88 New Zealanders who were illegally spied upon? And will they be informed of this breach of their civil liberties? Do you believe you are one of them?
I could be one of them. It was funny, I was talking to a journalist early yesterday afternoon, and it suddenly clicked that the illegal spying began in April of 2003. And when I looked through my SIS file in September of 2003, they were monitoring, that is the Security Intelligence Service was monitoring, according to two NZIS reports, one 10th of September, one 24th of September, which I have here. They were monitoring the preparations for my trip to Sri Lanka. And that puzzled me a bit because I hadn't made public I was going, and it may be that the GCSB was helping them, particularly as it involves some international dimension that the GCSB is involved in. So I am going to write to the Prime Minister to see if they were one of the 88 or whether the Sri Lankan Tamils I was working with in preparing for this tour, whether they were the ones being spied on. So I'm going to get a yes or no out of the Prime Minister. I think it's more likely that the Sri Lankan Tamils were being spied upon than me, but my communications might have been caught up in that spying if I texted, emailed, talked to them, whatever. It might have been some GCSB device in the vicinity.
Are you a threat to national security, Keith?
Well, I'm a threat to John Key and the politics of the National Party. And
but is that good enough for you to be spied on by the GCSB?
Well, if you look at it from the viewpoint of the SIS that my file, which is about that high, shows, I was spied on for 50 years. I was spied on not because of any illegality, whatever, but because of my criticisms on the Vietnam War, nuclear issue, apartheid, you name it, over those years. So that is the problem, you see, that most of these 88 people, maybe all of them, may not have been involved in any illegality. Maybe the police, the three in relation to a police warrant may have been involved in illegality, but possibly the other 85, which is GCSB spied on under SIS warrants, maybe they were not guilty of any illegality, because I think a key point that New Zealand should understand is that the intelligence service and the SIS were set up separate from the police to spy on people who aren't guilty of any illegality.
Right.
The police deals with criminal behaviour, illegality, and the GCSB and the SIS are primarily set up to spy on critics of the government or people who get in the way of their foreign policy.
Final question to both of you, because we have a lot to get through tonight. If it wasn't for Kim.com having the wealth to challenge the GCSB in court, we wouldn't have known any of this, and it would still be occurring. Is that the most concerning part?
Yeah, it's one of the most concerning parts, but the most concerning part to me, it really does come down to the reach of potential impropriety that we've detailed before, right from the GCSB, the police, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and the Prime Minister's office itself. And that's very concerning. This is really shaking the fabric of our executive office and government.
If this hadn't come out in court, they'd still be doing it, wouldn't they?
Yes, well, the whole culture around SIS and GCSB, particularly the GCSB, which is even more secretive than the SIS, is trust us, we're secret, and they actually relate more. Their peer group is not New Zealanders or New Zealand government. Their peer group is their counterparts in 4 other electronic intelligence agencies for the GCSB. That is the Defence Signals Directorate in Australia, the
NSA.
Canadian Security Establishment, the NSA, National Security Agency, the biggest one in America, and the Government Security Headquarters in Britain. And so they judge what they're doing and their targets and whether they're right or not by reference to those people, and they really don't care a damn about what a Prime Minister or an MP. I've struck that, really. They see themselves as beyond accountability.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2. So why shouldn't the GCSB be able to spy on New Zealand citizens on behalf of the Secret Intelligence Service and the New Zealand Police? The 1976 Church Committee in America investigating their security services counterintelligence program to spy on domestic targets found gross civil rights abuses of left-wing activists, and in the case of the Black Panthers, outright murder. Keith, why shouldn't military-grade surveillance go after citizens?
Well, I think you should look back at why the GCSB was set up separate from the other agencies in the first place. And there were 2 reasons. One, so that New Zealanders wouldn't be spied upon. And it's the same with the National Security Agency in America, it's a similar sort of thing. And the other thing was the nature of the intelligence that these electronic agencies gather is huge. It's not like with the police and the SIS, they pick a person and sort of target that person with a warrant, etc., etc. With electronic intelligence, like Waihopai, for example,
sniffing.
you're pulling down
It's sniffing through.
everybody's phone
Yeah.
calls and faxes and emails, and then you're searching them with word searches and whatnot like that. So you're storing huge amounts of material, and that problem is actually getting very worrying, because a big technological advance has been made in storage capacity. And now there's big debates in the United States on this, and same debate about whether the NSA is spying on Americans. But the NSA is building these huge storage systems so that you can store not only everything being brought down at Waihopai and all these other different electronic intelligence gathering things, but you can store them permanently. Gigantic storage systems, and then you trace, we're worried about Bomber Bradbury, just check him, and you can check 10 years back every emails, computer search, everything else. So that's the danger of this electronic intelligence agency problem.
Selwyn, if you tune into Talkback Radio, and I have, the meme is, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Isn't this just the opposition whinging about that nice Mr. Key?
Look, let's look at it, and building on from what Keith has been talking about here. For one, the GCSB looking at New Zealanders, it's illegal. It's against the law. That's one of the really good reasons why it shouldn't be doing it. Beyond that, those people that might criticise those who are a little bit resistant to the GCSB spying on New Zealanders, who are criticising them, how do they feel if they looked out the window one night and they see a peeping Tom looking through the window? They probably aren't doing anything illegal in their property. They're not doing anything that would justify, a concern. But it's kind of creepy. And it's this invasion of a person's privacy that is at issue here. That it has to be a very good reason for any organisation in this country to start being the government's peeping Tom.
Keith, if you consider the vast new search and surveillance powers handed to the police only last year, which allowed them to plant spy cameras in people's homes with the barest of judicial oversights, why do they need more power from the GCSB?
Yeah, if you look at the Irawera case, Operation 8, they were intercepting texts, they were intercepting phone calls, they were putting bugs in people's cars, they're putting tracking, they've got now under the search and surveillance bill, they can put tracking devices on cars, they've got huge powers of visual surveillance. To add to that, this access to huge electronic databases does get to a Orwellian thing. And for any practical purposes, and when we're talking about law changes, we should talk about practical purposes. If they're chasing people, do the police or the Security Intelligence Service need any more technological power than they've currently got?
Look, there's a big issue here, which has not been raised in either mainstream media or elsewhere. That we're preoccupied at the moment with the GCSB on behalf of the police and the SIS surveilling New Zealanders. What about the practice that I understand has been commonplace by the SIS over the years, where at the behest of an offshore partner of the Five Eyes network, meaning the United States, Canada, Britain, Australia, that it can look and surveil a New Zealander? Has the GCSB been doing this on behalf of overseas governments in the Five Eyes network? That is a can of worms that has not even come into this debate.
There's another twist on this, that say that you've got a Saudi Arabian person just got residency in New Zealand, and she's a Democrat and got blog sites going criticising the lack of democracy in Saudi Arabia, and somehow the international networks pick this up and then come to the GCSB and say, look, this is endangering our relations with Saudi Arabia. And the SIS and the police might not be focusing on her at all because she's obeying New Zealand law, just doing stuff on the internet. And the GCSB might come and say, look, we really want to help out Saudi Arabia and America on this, so could you just get an SIS warrant and then we can do the surveillance?
We've noticed over the last 5 years, and looking at these things closely, I did a master's thesis in looking at this type of stuff. What we were seeing is a blurring of the demarcation lines between the police, particularly its intel units, the SIS. We didn't even you know, Nikki Hager wrote on the Pundit website yesterday, I think it was, that just you didn't even think, because of that act Keith was talking about, that the GCSB would be on this as well. That demarcation is why there must be an independent inquiry into this whole mess.
Let's get into that now, finally, with issue 3, the accountability. Keith's response, as it was when the police were caught illegally spying, is to just pass law legalising the GCSB to spy on New Zealand citizens. What are your thoughts on that solution?
Well, it's just not justified, I think, as I've just explained, but there's got to be, just the concept of we've broken the law so we'll change the law is not good enough, and for all the reasons being explained. We don't want the GCSB with its huge capacities and Waihopa and everything else to spy on New Zealanders. But there needs to be very big changes in accountability mechanisms.
The oversight aspects.
The oversight. You need a proper parliamentary select committee. You need someone on that committee, like it's chaired by the Prime Minister, Minister in charge, whereas every other committee in the Parliament is chaired by someone who isn't a minister, even basic things like that. Inspector General, you need a whole new inspectorate.
It's under-resourced. He's on a 0.5 full-time equivalent.
You
He's
need an
retired.
inquiry to look at all of these
It goes
things.
on and on.
And then, of course, I've got a more fundamental critique of the intelligence services and why do we need the GCSB and the SIS independent of the police? If we're dealing with criminality, surely the police should be able to cover it. And there's one good function of the GCSB, and that is protecting government computers. And looking around at all the leaks, I don't know whether they've done a terribly good job.
No, that's right.
But even that function of the GCSB could be put under the police, a section of the police. The police already do chasing around the internet for child pornography and all the rest of it. So they're fairly expert. They've got computer sections there. Why not zap that up a bit and really protect WINS and other government computers?
So, what would an inquiry look like?
Oh, it's got to be fronted by a person who's got the confidence and respect of general New Zealanders, someone who's had judicial background, constitutional understanding, and somebody who is able to investigate or have a team of investigators here. It's got to go beyond a review, as Rebecca Kitteridge said of her own work. It must be beyond a review. There must be an investigation here. A person like Sir Anand Satchianand, the former Governor-General, comes to mind. The whole thing is there's so many legs to that, as the viewers tonight would see, that there's so many aspects that need to be looked at. The Prime Minister is right in the centre of involvement on this issue. Even if he was kept completely in the dark, there's an issue of whether or not he is working his responsibilities as the sole person with total oversight of this thing. Is he doing that right? You know, on every aspect there needs to be an investigation and an independent inquiry. Even the New Zealand Herald's most conservative writer, John Armstrong, wrote this morning that the opposition parties, as he put it, once and for all have got it right. There must be an independent inquiry. There are good reasons for that, and it's because not just the confidence has been drained from the Prime Minister's role in this, but the whole apparatus appeals to be complicit, and that must be addressed, and there must be solutions coming out of it.
But the GCSB, the question that's got to be asked is whose interest does it serve?
Yes, exactly.
And this came out in the Waihopa 3 trial, where one of the key bits of evidence was from a whistleblower from the government communications headquarters in Britain, who had leaked an email from Frank Koza of the NSA directing all of the branches, which includes Waihopa, to spy on members of the Security Council prior to the vote on whether to go to war in Iraq in 2003. So Waihopa was spying. That's one of the reasons, the key reasons I think they got off, is that people could see that Waihopa was being used. Helen Clark was saying, let's stay out of the Iraq war. Waihopa was being used to get information to twist the arms of Pakistan and Chile and Mexico, dissident members of the Security Council, to get them vote Britain.
Final question on this. When is this politically damaging for John Key?
Oh, absolutely. He's already been drained of his credibility. Every time now that he says, oh yes, well, it appears that they were acting illegally, so we will make it legal for them to do what they were doing unlawfully. I mean, anybody out there, if we said the same, you'd be thinking, oh, what a bunch of idiots, and you'd change channel.
Yeah.
This is the Prime Minister of the country. His credibility is gone on it.
When does it damage John Keith?
Well, I think it's already damaged him, and with a multifaceted scandal like this, it keeps on rolling. And I think what I'm hoping is that people will look more closely at the SIS and the GCSB and see if we really need those agencies in a democratic society.
Let's wrap the show on final words on other issues this week. Selwyn, your final word this week.
Well, Baroness Margaret Thatcher passed away this week, and in remembrance of her time in Britain, I thought, well, I'll listen to Pink Floyd's album from when she was right there, The Final Cut, which was subtitled A Requiem to the Post-War Dream. And it was based on the event where Margaret Thatcher entered Britain into the Falklands conflict. It's a fantastic album, and I remember as an apprentice in a factory opposite Ericsson Stadium at the time, miserable as sin, welding away listening to this on some homemade type of headphone type things. And it was an amazing moment. So thank you, Thatcher, for helping to politicise my thinking from 1981 onwards.
Keith, your final word this week.
Well, I've been reading and watching all the commentary from Afghanistan, from, I wouldn't be so unkind as to call them embedded journalists, but the ones that went over with, who was it, the Governor-General, etc., and they've all run these stories about what a great job the New Zealand troops did and how they've made the country safer and all the rest of it. No, it didn't seem to quite square with the other message that all of these interpreters have got to come to New Zealand because it's such a dangerous place. And there's a funny dissonance there between we must have done a good job because we always do a good job, and after the Americans and New Zealanders leave, who knows what's going to happen, and possibly by the foreign occupation of Afghanistan, instead of undermining the Taliban, has actually strengthened the Taliban.
Thank you, Selwyn. Thank you, Keith. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. Now beneficiaries will be drug tested. How about breathalyzing MPs? What's more dangerous to New Zealand, I ask you? A jobless stoner or a drunk politician? When will New Zealanders sate their Benny-bashing thirsts? I suggest to you, never. For a rump segment of the country, their hatred for those on welfare is the only legitimised bigotry allowed in New Zealand now, and they drink like alcoholics in a brewery to quench their never-ending anger. Because of the neoliberal policies of National in the 1990s, our per-hour wage collapsed. Rather than blame National for the pittance they take home each week, the working poor look at the welfare check with envy and blame those on welfare rather than blame the National Party for their economic precariousness. The children in these welfare families are the ones who will be crucified so rump National Party voters can feel a sense of lynch mob justice. We are building an empire of suffering from the lives of the poorest New Zealanders so that the frustrations of our own insulated, disconnected, lonely and desperate existences can be channeled and directed at the other. The 270,000 children living in poverty just had their fragile and difficult lives made even more harsh by a redneck sports bar loving populace who despise intellectual explanations of the why and prefer the logic of the whip. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand